Have you ever witnessed a moment where justice turned the tables on arrogance? The father of a black CEO is publicly humiliated by a white billionaire family, so he cancels a $1 billion deal. Sir, deliveries and cleaning staff must use the back entrance. The receptionist's sharp voice echoed through the marble lobby of the Whitmore Country Club, abruptly halting Thomas Carter's confident stride. The 63-year-old man stopped, confused, clutching the golden invitation his son had personally handed him the day before. He was wearing his best navy blue suit, the same one he had worn to Daniel's graduation from Harvard Business School 15 years ago. "Excuse me, but I'm invited to my son's business lunch." "Of course you are," murmured Victoria Whitmore, matriarch of the billionaire family, approaching with a cold smile. Her heels echoed on the marble like hammers delivering a sentence. "Let me guess. You must be the new gardener, or perhaps the driver who got lost." Her crystal-clear laughter attracted curious glances from the other guests, businessmen in Italian suits, heirs to old fortunes, all watching the spectacle with the same morbid curiosity as someone watching a car crash. Want to know how this unfolds? Stay tuned to Black Voices. Thomas felt the heat rise in his neck, but he maintained the composure he had learned in 40 years as a public accountant. This wasn't the first time someone had judged his appearance before getting to know his story. "I'm Thomas Carter, father of Daniel Carter, CEO of Carter Logistics." Victoria clapped her hands theatrically as if applauding a child who had just told a joke. "Oh, how sweet. The boy brought his daddy to see how adults do real business. How touching." Across the room, Daniel Carter watched the scene in slow motion. At 38, he had turned a small family transportation company into a logistics empire worth $800 million. The merger with the Whitmore Group, a billion-dollar deal that would be signed that afternoon, represented the crowning achievement of a decade of relentless work. But as he saw the contempt in Victoria's eyes directed at the man who had raised him alone after his mother's untimely death, something cold and familiar took hold of his chest. It was the same feeling he had as a child, watching his father being ignored at school meetings by other parents who assumed he couldn't contribute financially to events. Thomas remained motionless, but Daniel knew that look. It was the expression of a man who had worked 3 jobs so his son could attend private schools, who had sold his own car so Daniel could get his first company truck, who had never once complained about the sacrifices necessary to give his son a chance he himself had never had. Victoria continued her cruel performance, unaware that every word was being recorded by security cameras and the discreet cell phones of some of the younger guests. "I'm sure there's some yard work available in the back if you're looking for a job. Or maybe we can find something in the kitchen." One of Whitmore's partners, a middle-aged man with a hoarse laugh, muttered something about knowing his place loud enough for Thomas to hear. Others began to whisper, creating a circle of humiliation around the man who had dedicated his entire life to building dignity through honest work. That's when Daniel moved. He walked straight up to his father, put his arm around his shoulders with the tenderness of someone who recognizes a hero, and looked Victoria in the eye with a calmness that silenced the entire room. "This man taught me that dignity cannot be bought or sold. He just taught me a valuable lesson about who I choose to do business with." The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas looked at his son, a small, proud smile playing on his lips. 40 years of raising that boy had been worth it at that very moment. What Victoria Whitmore didn't know was that she had just declared war on the wrong man. And what would happen in the next few hours would turn the humiliation into the most expensive mistake of her billionaire life. While everyone there thought they had witnessed just another episode of social arrogance, Daniel remained calm, as if he had anticipated this moment exactly, as if he knew that the true test of the Whitmore family's character would come long before the signing of any contract. Can you imagine the revenge that's about to unfold? Keep watching Black Voices to find out. If this story of injustice and revenge touched you, don't forget to subscribe to Black Voices. Because what Daniel did next changed not only his life, but rewrote the rules of the game for an entire family that thought money could buy everything. The humiliation was far from over. Victoria Whitmore, drunk on her own superiority, decided to turn that moment into a spectacle. "Richard," she called to her husband, who was talking to other billionaires near the bar. "Come meet the father of our new partner." Richard Whitmore approached with a Cuban cigar between his fingers, examining Thomas from head to toe as if evaluating cattle. Impressive how they can dress properly when necessary, he commented to his wife, completely ignoring the presence of father and son. Thomas felt each word like a knife, but his expression remained calm. He had learned decades ago that reacting to contempt only fed the ego of those who practiced it. Daniel watched everything, mentally cataloging every insult, every cruel laugh, every condescending glance from the other guests. "Dad worked 40 years as an accountant," Daniel said calmly, his voice cutting through the mocking murmur around him. "3 jobs at once so I could go to college." Victoria let out a crystal-clear laugh. What a touching story. And now the little boy wants to play businessman with the grown-ups. She gestured theatrically to the other guests. Just imagine, from neighborhood accountant to billionaire in a generation. How American. What you didn't know was that Thomas Carter hadn't been just any accountant. For 40 years, he had audited mid-sized companies, uncovering tax fraud, identifying money laundering, and exposing schemes that respectable businessmen believed to be perfectly hidden. His reputation for absolute integrity was legendary among lawyers and federal judges. As Victoria continued her cruel performance, Thomas remembered the sleepless nights studying court cases to help Daniel understand complex contracts. The Saturday mornings teaching his son how to analyze balance sheets at the kitchen table. The quiet pride when Daniel closed his first $1 million deal. "You know, honey," Richard said to his wife loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe we should reconsider this merger. We don't want our reputation associated with certain origins." That's when something changed in the room. Daniel didn't change his posture or raise his voice, but everyone around him felt a different energy emanating from him. It was as if a storm was brewing in seemingly calm waters. "Interesting perspective," Daniel replied, his eyes fixed on Richard, especially coming from someone whose fortune was built on overpriced government contracts in the 1980s. The silence that followed was different from the previous one. Richard choked slightly on the cigar smoke, his eyes narrowing. "Excuse me." Daniel smiled for the first time since entering the club. It was not a friendly smile. "Oh, I research my business partners very well, Richard. Especially those who like to judge origins." Victoria tried to regain control of the situation. "Now, young man." "No," Daniel interrupted her gently. "You're going to listen." He turned to the group of guests, many now clearly uncomfortable. "My father taught me that character isn't inherited, it's built. That dignity isn't bought, it's earned, and that not all money is worth earning." Thomas watched his son with a mixture of pride and concern. He knew that determined look, the same one Daniel had had at 12 when he decided he would become a businessman, so that no child would ever have to see his father work 3 jobs as he had. What the Whitmores didn't realize was that every derogatory word was being documented by the discreet cell phones of younger guests. That every racist and classist comment was creating evidence that would be impossible to deny later. Bradley Whitmore, the youngest son of the family, tried to ease the tension. "Maybe we're taking the joke too far." "Fun." Thomas spoke for the first time since the introductions, his voice calm, but laden with authority. "Son, this isn't fun. It's education. You see how some people reveal their true character when they think there are no consequences." Victoria, now visibly irritated by the audacity of being confronted, decided to escalate the humiliation even further. "Security," she called to 2 men in dark suits standing near the entrance. "We have some individuals here who are clearly lost." It was at that moment that Daniel realized he had underestimated the depth of this family's arrogance. It was also when he decided that the billion-dollar merger, which would represent the pinnacle of his business career, had become secondary to something much more important. As the security guards approached hesitantly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, Daniel maintained a calm that intrigued even his father. It was as if he had predicted this escalation of events. As if he had been waiting for the Whitmores to show their true colors before revealing what he really knew about them. Each new humiliation only strengthened something inside him that his oppressors couldn't see. A determination that had been shaped by years of watching his father face prejudice with unwavering dignity, combined with information that would make any experienced executive lose sleep. Daniel followed his father to the parking lot in silence. But his mind was racing. While Thomas tried to process the public humiliation he had just suffered, his son was already 3 steps ahead, calculating every move he would make in the next few hours. "Dad," Daniel said softly, opening the door of the Lincoln Navigator. "I need you to trust me now more than ever." Thomas looked into his son's eyes and saw something familiar. The same cold determination Thomas himself had shown 40 years earlier when he decided he would never again allow anyone to determine the value of his dignity based on the color of his skin or the size of his bank account. As he drove back to Manhattan, Daniel called Natasha Rodriguez, his lawyer and best friend since Harvard. Natasha had grown up in the same neighborhood as Daniel before becoming one of New York's most feared corporate lawyers. "Nat, I need everything you can get on the Whitmore family. Government contracts, sealed court settlements, political connections, everything." His voice was calm, but Natasha knew that tone. "Daniel, what happened?" she asked, already typing on her computer. "They made the mistake of showing their true colors to the wrong person." During the last 6 months of negotiations, Daniel had conducted a discreet investigation into the Whitmores, not out of suspicion, but out of business prudence. What he had discovered had been filed away as contingency information. Now, every page of those reports took on new meaning. Meanwhile, at the Whitmore Country Club, the family celebrated what they considered an easy victory. Victoria toasted with Dom Perignon champagne, convinced she had put those people in their place. "Did you see how quickly they left?" Richard laughed to the other guests. "As soon as we show them authority, they always back down." Bradley, the youngest son, looked uncomfortable. "Mom, maybe we overreacted. Daniel Carter isn't exactly a small-time businessman." "Please," Victoria waved him off dismissively. "A backyard businessman who got too big for his boots. I bet he'll be back tomorrow begging to sign the contract." What Victoria didn't know was that at that very moment, Daniel was on the 40th floor of his corporate building, meeting with a team she would never have imagined existed. Natasha had arrived with 3 boxes of documents, accompanied by Marcus Williams, a former FBI investigator specializing in white-collar crime. Marcus began spreading photographs and spreadsheets across the conference table. "You won't believe what we found in the last 6 months. The findings were devastating. Overpriced contracts with the Department of Defense in the 1980s, million-dollar settlements to cover up cases of racial discrimination at his companies, connections to politicians who facilitated questionable environmental approvals. This," Natasha pointed to a specific document, "is a sealed settlement for $2 million paid to a black family in 2010. They sued Whitmore Industries for systematic discrimination. The family was forced to sign a confidentiality agreement." Daniel studied each page meticulously. It wasn't just about money or questionable contracts. It was about a pattern of behavior that spanned decades. His father's humiliation had not been an isolated incident, but the public manifestation of something much deeper and more systematic. "There's more," Marcus continued, connecting his laptop to the room's big screen. "We found 7 former employees willing to talk about the work environment at Whitmore companies. They all signed similar confidentiality agreements." Thomas Carter had remained silent throughout the presentation, watching his son orchestrate something that had clearly been months in the making. Finally, he spoke. "Son, did you know this was going to happen today?" Daniel turned to his father, his eyes revealing a sadness mixed with determination. "I didn't know it would be you, Dad, but I knew that sooner or later they would show their true colors. People like the Whitmores can't hide their true nature for long." Natasha interrupted the family conversation. "Daniel, we have a window of opportunity here. The merger agreement hasn't been officially cancelled yet. Technically, you can still go back tomorrow and sign." "Why would I do that?" "Because," she smiled with the ferocity of a predator. "Imagine the impact when they find out that the man they humiliated today has enough information to destroy not only their business but their reputation built over generations." Daniel looked out the panoramic window, watching the lights of New York begin to come on in the twilight. Each point of light represented a family, a history, dreams being built or destroyed by decisions made in rooms like this one. Marcus broke the silence. "There's something else you need to know. The merger between Carter Logistics and the Whitmore Group isn't just beneficial to you, it's essential to them. Without this deal, they have a serious liquidity problem in 18 months. Thomas smiled for the first time since they left the club. So, they need us more than we need them. Exactly, Natasha confirmed. And now Daniel has something they never expected to face. The ability to choose not only whether this deal happens, but on what terms. Daniel remained silent for several minutes, processing not only the financial information, but the moral weight of the decision he was about to make. This was no longer a simple business agreement. It had become a matter of justice that transcended contracts and figures. When he finally turned to the team, his eyes shone with an intensity that made everyone realize that something extraordinary was about to happen. It was the expression of someone who had found the exact point where moral principles meet strategic power. A combination the Whitmores would learn to fear over the next 24 hours. Under the weight of all that information and planning, one thing was becoming crystal clear. The humiliation of Thomas Carter had been merely the trigger for something much bigger that was about to explode. Rewriting not only the fate of two families, but redefining how power and prejudice interact when confronted by documented truth and strategic intelligence. The next morning, Daniel returned to the Whitmore Country Club, wearing the same suit he had worn the day before. Victoria and Richard awaited him in the main hall, radiant with confidence, surrounded by lawyers and financial journalists, summoned to witness the signing of the billion-dollar deal. "I knew you'd come back," Victoria murmured with a venomous smile as Daniel approached the polished mahogany table where the contracts awaited. "People like you always come crawling back when reality hits." Daniel smiled calmly, placing his leather briefcase on the table. "You're right, Victoria. I did come to sign an agreement today. It's just not the agreement you're expecting." The first hint of confusion appeared on Richard's face when Daniel opened his briefcase and instead of taking out a pen, pulled out a sealed envelope. "Before we talk about mergers, I need to clear up some misunderstandings about the Whitmore family." Victoria laughed. But there was something forced about her laughter. "What kind of charade is this, young man?" Daniel opened the envelope and spread photographs across the table. "This is Jennifer Martinez, fired from your company in 2010 after reporting harassment by white supervisors. Confidentiality agreement, $2 million. More photos. Here we have Roberto Silva, an engineer with 15 years on the job, fired a week after questioning why black employees were never promoted to executive positions. Settlement $1.5 million. The silence that followed was unlike anything the club had ever witnessed. Richard tried to interrupt. "Listen, these are confidential documents." They were confidential, Daniel continued relentlessly, pulling more papers from the folder until 7 former employees decided to break their confidentiality agreements simultaneously this morning. All willing to speak out about the systematic environment of racial discrimination at Whitmore. Victoria had visibly paled. "You can't prove anything." Daniel turned on his laptop and projected a spreadsheet onto the wall. Data from the last 15 years. 0 black employees in executive positions. 300% higher termination rate for non-white employees. Consistently lower salaries for the same jobs. His voice remained calm, almost professorial. "Mathematics doesn't lie, Victoria." The journalists present began to photograph frantically. Richard tried desperately to control the situation. "This is an ambush. You can't use." "I can and I will," Daniel interrupted, connecting a tape recorder to the sound system, including this. Victoria's voice echoed through the hall. "I'm sure there's some gardening work available in the back if you're looking for a job." Followed by Richard's cruel laughter and comments about knowing his place. Victoria stood up abruptly, knocking over her chair. "You had no right to record." "Actually, I did. You were in a public place with multiple witnesses." Daniel calmly turned off the tape recorder, but that's just the appetizer. Natasha Rodriguez entered the room at that moment, carrying a second, even bulkier briefcase. "Messrs. Whitmore. I am Natasha Rodriguez, legal representative of the 7 former employees who have just filed a class action lawsuit against your companies. We are seeking $50 million in damages for moral damages and systematic discrimination." Richard staggered slightly. This is extortion. This is justice, Daniel replied, closing his briefcase. And I'm not done yet. He turned to the journalists. Members of the press, in 5 minutes, you'll receive in your email a complete dossier on the Whitmore family's discriminatory practices, including recordings, testimonials, and questionable tax documentation. Victoria tried one last desperate gambit. You're destroying your own career. No one will want to do business with someone who breaks confidentiality. Daniel smiled for the first time with genuine satisfaction. Funny, you should mention confidentiality because I just discovered something fascinating about the government's overpriced contracts in the 1980s. He motioned to Marcus Williams, who entered carrying boxes of documents. Systematic tax fraud, defense contract overbilling, bribery of government officials, Marcus listed methodically, all statute-barred, of course, but enough to destroy any remaining corporate reputation. It was then that Richard Whitmore fully comprehended the extent of the catastrophe. This wasn't just an angry black executive. They had provoked someone who had the resources, intelligence, and more dangerously the patience to orchestrate systematic and legal destruction. Bradley Whitmore, who had remained silent until then, whispered to his father, "Dad, without the merger and with these lawsuits, the company will go bankrupt in 6 months." Daniel heard the whisper and slowly turned to the Whitmore's youngest son. "Bradley, you seem to be the only one with functioning brain cells in this family. I have a proposal for you." Victoria screamed hysterically. "Don't you dare talk to my son." "Calm down, Mom." Bradley replied, staring intently at Daniel. "What proposal?" "Carter Logistics will buy the operating assets of Whitmore Industries for 40 cents on the dollar. Fair value considering what's about to happen to the company's reputation." Daniel paused for effect. "You keep your homes and a modest income, or would you prefer total bankruptcy and prolonged public humiliation?" Richard tried to protest, but Victoria silenced him with a gesture. For the first time in decades, the matriarch of the family was speechless. Daniel calmly gathered his documents. "You have 48 hours to decide. After that, the offer expires, and you will face the consequences of 40 years of arrogance and discrimination on your own." As he walked toward the exit, accompanied by Thomas, who had watched everything in proud silence, Daniel turned one last time. "Oh, Victoria, about that comment yesterday, my father really could do some gardening here, as the new owner of the establishment." The slam of the door echoed like a judge's gavel sealing a sentence. In the devastating silence that followed, 3 generations of privilege and prejudice began to crumble like a house of cards in a storm they themselves had created. Over the next 24 hours, headlines would spread like wildfire. Billionaire family exposed for systematic discrimination. Black CEO cancels billion-dollar merger after family humiliation. Documents reveal decades of corporate racism. But what none of them knew yet was how this public exposure would transform not only their lives but forever redefine the rules of the game between power, privilege, and consequences in an age where truth travels faster than any attempt to stifle it. 47 hours later, Bradley Whitmore sat alone in the office that had belonged to his father for 3 decades, surrounded by cardboard boxes and sales contracts. Victoria had locked herself in the house, refusing to speak to journalists or even go out to buy food. Richard had suffered a nervous breakdown and been hospitalized after discovering that his billionaire friends had blocked all his numbers. Bradley's phone call to Daniel that morning lasted only 3 minutes. "I accept your offer," were his first words, his voice broken with the pride of a family man who had just buried his pride. "My parents, they can't accept reality. But I have young children and I can't let them pay for their grandparents' prejudice." 6 months later, Daniel Carter was in the same hall at the Whitmore Country Club, now renamed the Carter Community Center. What had once been an exclusive club for the white elite had become a community center offering free music lessons, educational tutoring, and job training for young people from disadvantaged neighborhoods. Thomas Carter, now 64, walked through the garden he had helped redesign, not as a gardener, but as a volunteer landscape consultant, teaching neighborhood children about sustainable agriculture in the same space where Victoria had suggested he look for a job caring for plants. "Dad," Daniel approached, watching a group of Black and Latino teenagers playing the violin in what had once been the Whitmore's exclusive dining room. "Remember when she asked if you were looking for a job gardening? Thomas smiled, his hands still dirty from planting roses with the children. She was right. I was looking for a job in gardening. I just didn't know it would be planting seeds of dignity where only contempt had grown before. Daniel's transformation had been even more impressive. Carter Logistics had not only survived without the Whitmore merger, it had prospered spectacularly. 3 large corporations, impressed by his ethical stance during the scandal, had offered partnerships worth more than the original deal. The company now employed over 5,000 people with a strict diversity policy that had become a national model. Victoria Whitmore, on the other hand, had become a complete social pariah. Her invitations to charity events were cancelled. The golf club terminated her lifetime membership, and even her hairdressers and personal stylists shunned her. Richard, after being released from the hospital, moved to a modest home in Florida, where he lived as a recluse, paying his bills with a small pension he had negotiated in the forced sale. Bradley had used some of the money from the sale to found a non-profit organization focused on combating discrimination in the corporate environment. "My family has caused pain for generations," he explained in a televised interview that went viral. "Now I'm going to devote the rest of my life to trying to repair that damage." Natasha Rodriguez, who had become a minority partner in the expansion of Carter Logistics, often joked with Daniel about how the Whitmore's arrogance had been the best thing that ever happened to the company. "They thought they were humiliating you guys," she would laugh during board meetings. "In reality, they were handing us the biggest growth opportunity in our history on a silver platter." A year after the confrontation, Daniel received a national award for ethical business leadership. During his acceptance speech, he dedicated the award to his father. "Thomas Carter taught me that true power isn't about subjugating others, but about lifting up those around us. The best revenge against prejudice isn't to destroy those who discriminate against us. It's to build a world where that discrimination becomes irrelevant." In the audience, Thomas wiped away a tear as he applauded his son. At his side, Jennifer Martinez, Roberto Silva, and the 7 other former Whitmore employees who had found the courage to speak out now worked in leadership positions at Carter Logistics. Their voices finally heard after years of enforced silence. The story had spread far beyond business circles. Universities began teaching the Carter case in business ethics classes. Young entrepreneurs cited Daniel as an example of how moral values can be more valuable than any contract. And in communities where children grew up facing similar prejudices, the story of Thomas and Daniel became a legend whispered with hope. Victoria Whitmore never publicly apologized. Even in social and financial ruin, she maintained that she had been the victim of a politically correct witch hunt. But her irrelevance was complete. No one cared about her version of the story anymore. Daniel learned that true victory was not in destroying the Whitmores, but in using the platform created by the conflict to lift up others facing similar injustices. Every employee promoted, every young person trained at the community center, every family benefiting from the company's inclusive policies represented a more powerful response to prejudice than any humiliation could provide. 2 years later, when Daniel cut the ribbon at the 10th Carter Community Center across the country, Thomas stood beside him, using the same hands Victoria had scorned to applaud a legacy she could never understand. The lesson was crystal clear. When you turn injustice into fuel to build something greater, you don't just defeat your oppressors, you render them irrelevant. And there is no revenge more complete than success that makes your enemies realize they were never worthy of your attention in the first place. If this story of transformation touched you, subscribe to Black Voices to discover more real stories of people who turned humiliation into fuel for extraordinary change. Because sometimes the best response to hatred is simply to shine brighter than those who try to extinguish our